Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that I think is really important. It's called CGMs. Well, what is that? Continuous glucose monitors. We're going to talk about what they are and how they can help optimize your health for peak performance throughout your life. And today's guest is Catherine Staffieri. And she is a registered dietitian nutritionist, currently working as a nutritional manager at NutriSense, one of the fastest growing health tech startups aimed to help anyone discover and reach their health potential. Catherine has counseled thousands of clients on their glucose scores, reviewing over 750,000 hours of glucose data and recorded meals in the process, while recommending nutritional adjustments to improve metabolic health. She holds a master's in nutrition education from Columbia University and completed her undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania. She enjoys cooking, spending time with her 3 kids, and traveling and being active. And she's taking time out of that busy schedule to join us today. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited too, because a while back, about a couple of years ago, under the advice of my naturopathic doctor, they just stick this thing in my arm and track the response of blood sugar, because blood sugar is a big issue. And there were some remarkable things that happened from that. Not only that did I do that, a whole group of our team members, the BioTribe group at Bioptimizers, we're all doing this. And we found some fascinating information about blood glucose and their individual response to the same things.
Right.
And that was shocking, because that was maybe against a lot of the information, the kind of earlier dietary implementations of, when you look at, blood sugar index and things like that, like what's the response? And I always was skeptical of that information, because like carrots would look bad and ice cream would look good. And I'm like, I can't get fat from eating carrots, but I definitely can get fat from ice cream. So obviously this was independent. So can talk about CGMs, your history, how you got involved in this, because I think it's a fascinating topic and a lot of people just really don't know what a CGM is and what's the benefit.
Totally. So we'll start with the basics. So a CGM stands for continuous glucose monitor. And it's a little disc. It's about maybe the size of a quarter, probably. It's maybe about this thick, with a small little sensor probe in the middle. And what you do is you insert it in the back of your arm. And what it does is it's continuously monitoring your interstitial glucose, which is really cool for people like us that like to dive into the data. But how it's different and why this is sort of newish technology is that if you if you're type 1 diabetic or even type 2, you were constantly doing finger pricks, right? You might have seen someone, maybe a relative or a friend or something, and they had to prick their finger and draw a little bit of blood, stick it in a machine, wait for that. And it's like at that one point in time, they learned what their glucose was. Well, that's okay. That gives you like some information, right? Or maybe if you go to your annual physical and your doctor has you, take your fasting lab draw and you get your fasting glucose, okay, that's Tuesday. Sure. But what about all the other days? What's happening, at lunch? What's happening at dinner? So this continuous glucose monitor, this little disc with the sensor, is giving us data 24/7, which is fascinating. And what NutriSense did was that we took that hardware and we created an app. And so you can scan your sensor, download all that information, and we can see exactly what your body is doing for as long as you want to wear a sensor. And the other really wonderful thing about NutriSense is that you have a dietitian on the other end helping you understand what all of this data means, because it's one thing to just look at a graph, and it's another thing to take that graph and do something with it to improve your health. So that's really the cool thing about the continuous glucose monitor. You're getting a continuous stream of information. And I like to compare it to like a window. Like this is a little window of what's happening in your body right now, which is so cool. And I think it's applicable to anyone out there. That's really our motto at NutriSense, is that, this kind of data can help anyone achieve their health goals.
So with that, some people might not understand. Well, they go, well, I'm not a diabetic. What is the importance of understanding my glucose level at any given time of the day? What's the implications? What are the benefits? What should I be looking for? Like, what's all this whole story about?
Yeah. I think, especially in this time where there's so many wearables, there's so many tracking things, there's so many ways, should I be counting my calories? Should I be, tracking this and my heart rate variability and stuff? We think that glucose is a really important biomarker, and frankly, just as important as, like blood pressure, cholesterol levels, things that we typically see as accepted for health markers for longevity, but also to prevent chronic disease. What a lot of the research shows is that chronically high levels of glucose and the insulin resistance that goes along with that, huge implications for inflammation in the body. What happens with inflammation down the road? We know that there's that whole cascade effect, and you're higher risk for heart disease and other chronic illnesses. So we really feel like this is such a great preventative measure, not just for preventing diabetes, but for preventing a whole host of issues down the road. And why not get it under control now? We also think it's really cool for women who are going through various hormonal changes in their life, or maybe who are struggling with hormonal changes, because it's all linked, right? It's all interlinked. And so we just think it's really interesting, regardless of where you are in your life cycle, that you can use this information to help.
So here's an interesting point. So if we look at the three biggest killers today, we've got heart disease, we've got cancer, and we've got diabetes related illnesses. And then we've got medical error, and it's probably after that, which is usually trying to treat one of the other issues or prevent. Now, there's an interesting role between blood sugar and all of those big diseases. For example, vascular disease, you go, well, what does that have to do with blood sugar levels? Right. And I have the double gene, bad gene for cardiovascular risk. It's an area that was really important to me. And to understand, I also have to watch out for my blood sugar. And the blood sugar is what really contributes to the second thing. Can you share for our listeners maybe the interrelation between blood sugar levels and its impacts on those diseases particularly? And because that might give some people some idea of like, oh, I've got, cancer in my family, or I got heart disease in my family, or yeah, Uncle Larry's a diabetic, and, Cousin Mary's a diabetic. Maybe I should see that, right? Could you give us some light on that?
Yeah. So, I think there's sort of two ways to go about that interrelationship, and one is that inflammation that I was talking about, in the sense that what the research is showing us is that these chronically high levels of glucose, which I can kind of go into what that means in a second, is showing us and very closely linked to inflammation throughout the body, right? And as we know, inflammation throughout the body can be seen in your vessels, that increases your blood pressure, increases the tax on all of your organs, can really inflame your gut and GI issues. And we know how much that plays a role in your immune system and your ability to fight off infections. And then you also have this constant high glucose, insulin resistance, leading to obesity and the sort of the inflammation as well, and that the body is continuing to store these high levels of glucose as fat in your body as opposed to using them for energy. And we all know that obesity, though it's not a causation, is correlated with a lot of these chronic illnesses as well.
So do you think the obesity per se, or is it the inflammation from having like a surplus of food that creates this blood sugar response? And we store it, like body fat is kind of like the safest way that we can store excess calories in a way. But this inflammatory response that you're referring to, can you kind of break down what happens in an inflammatory response from high glucose levels, I guess, to get specific?
I can try. I don't know that I can answer it exactly. But having this constantly. So let me go back and maybe just explain the basics in terms of how glucose and insulin work, just to give everyone kind of a basic idea. So, you eat a meal, maybe it's, rice and chicken or something like that. And it gets broken down into the most basic building block of a carbohydrate is glucose, right? And the body loves glucose. Our brains love glucose. Like it is a wonderful source of energy. So, at NutriSense, we're not anti-glucose. We just want to make sure we're, using it in the right way, right? And that our body is responding to it in the right way. Okay. So you have your meal, you take in some carbohydrate, the body breaks it down into glucose. It then gets absorbed into your bloodstream. And what happens is, internally, your body says, oh, hey, we got some carbohydrate coming in. I see some glucose. Let me make some insulin. So insulin is a hormone that your body makes in the pancreas. And that insulin, we like to think of it as like a lock and key kind of thing. Insulin is the key that unlocks your cells, that allows the glucose to go in. Okay. So when everything,
most anabolic hormone in the body, a lot of people think of testosterone as an anabolic hormone, but it's actually insulin. It's really interesting.
I think it's fascinating, right? And I think people get the terms mixed up and they think it's a terrible thing, and absolutely not. What we want is just for insulin to be in sort of lockstep with the amount of carbohydrate that we're taking. We want a balance, right? So we're not anti either one. We don't want your body to never produce, insulin or never to eat carbohydrates, but we just want to make sure that of what you're eating and taking in, your body is creating the appropriate amount of insulin, and then you're able to absorb that. Like your cells are recognizing that key in the lock and taking everything in. When you have insulin resistance, your body is continuing to pump out the insulin, but the cells they're not understanding the key, right? The key isn't unlocking it. So what you have is that your glucose has nowhere to go. It's just floating around in your bloodstream, right? And that's then where we see those inflammatory markers going up. When we see someone with high insulin resistance, when we see people with chronically elevated glucose because there's nowhere for it to go, that's when we then see the inflammation in various parts of the body.
That's a really great explanation for people to understand, because I think there's so much misunderstanding of insulin resistance and the inflammatory response that starts to accelerate under those conditions. So your body's trying to say, hey, stop storing the body fat because we can't handle it anymore. That's why it's down regulating the insulin key, I guess, essentially. That would be down regulation on a cell site.
Correct.
And then we've got this essentially glucose bopping around in the bloodstream. what does that feel like when you have elevated insulin levels? And is there a range that people should know? It's like, did they tell you that NutriSense? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes, unfortunately, I think some people wish that we had both, a continuous glucose monitor, but it was also a continuous insulin monitor, that it's also a continuous ketone monitor. We'd love to see all of these things, right, at the same time to kind of see how it's all going. But we can only look at glucose, and we use that as our proxy. But we're looking for, you can get a fasting insulin taken. You generally have to request that sort of specially from your primary.
Is that like the Homo IR test?
A little, yes. But
I've done that test particularly.
And how did it go? What were your thoughts?
My naturopathic doctor said if he didn't know me, he would think I was on a ketogenic diet because my blood sugar was really low and really stable. But I'm a plant-based vegetarian, so I eat a lot of carbohydrates. And I do really well on it. So he found it kind of interesting. So.
Super. I mean, and that, that's also the really interesting thing about this technology, right? Is that it is so individual to who you are.
Right.
Your stuff is going to look so different than what mine looks like. And my medical history and my background and my epigenetics are so different than yours. So like you mentioned in the beginning, when you have 5 different people wearing the CGM, they could eat the same meals and you have 5 totally different responses.
Yeah. Like, for example, we were doing some testing with our teams, and some people could drink a coffee in the morning and see a spike in their blood sugar, and other people would see nothing. And that's coffee with nothing in it. And people go, well, how is a coffee creating a blood sugar spike? So it's not necessarily, or some people on our team, like I would eat, for example, potatoes, and blood sugar was relatively okay. Other people would eat potatoes and it'd just go through the roof.
Right.
And it was like, we're actually seeing this interrelation between the individual and their blood sugar, not a one food size fits all, which has been primarily most of the dietary tribalism that's kind of saying, stay away from starchy carbohydrates and eat more of this and that. But you can drill down a lot deeper using this technology. Would that be accurate?
100%, because, we could look at like the glycemic index and say, this is a bad food, this is a good food. But for you and your body type, you probably have a lot more muscle than I do. Right. And so your ability to handle the same amount of carbohydrate is completely different than me. Right. And men and women and hormone, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I always say that if you see the 98-year-old grandmother, or you walk in and see the 300-pound bodybuilder at the Gold's Gym where I trained, it's pretty obvious that their needs, their responses, how they metabolize things is completely different. And I used to get in fights in university with my professors because I said, they'd say they could take, a group of people age 20 to 50 in the study of men and women equally disparate. I'm like, I don't know anything about these people. How can you come to the conclusion that, this is a peer-reviewed study? And I'm like, but that doesn't apply to the outliers inside of that group, or maybe predominance in a group, or all these sort of things that we couldn't account for back then. But now you can.
Exactly. And I think it's, that's what's so interesting. And, I think some people get frustrated. They're like, well, but, I want to eat that, or this guy's eating it and he's totally fine, and that's where, we think that NutriSense and your health coaches and everyone that you're helping, you're trying to meet the individual where they are, right? Okay. So this person wants to be able to enjoy carbohydrate. That's great. Let's find a way for you to still enjoy potatoes or oatmeal or pasta or sushi, whatever it is. Let's maybe increase some muscle mass so that your body has more healthy forms of storage for your glucose, right? So as we know, the body wants to store glucose in your liver, in your muscles. And if it runs out of storage space, it's going to store it in some adipose tissue, right? So if we can increase your lean muscle mass, if we can, do some real strength training, then you'll have a better response. Your body will have more opportunity for storing this, storing this energy, and it won't necessarily end up in places you don't want it to.
Yeah, this was a topic that was really fascinating, particularly in pre-contest bodybuilding, which I always say bodybuilders are the original biohackers. They would do all sorts of radical experiments. And for example, with the storage of body fat. So we think of body fat as just body fat. It's something hideous that looks out, but there's intramuscular body fat that could actually make your muscles look fuller and leaner. There's fat, there's adipose tissue, there's brown fat, white fat. And so there's different, and there's the fat around the nervous system, the myelin sheath, and there's all these different categories of fat even in the body that is often lost on the cosmetic conversation that people didn't really understand. Bodybuilders would really get into this. And then now it's interesting to see years later from the industry is a lot of the things that people were figuring out then is now being applied and managed, not through trial and error, which was what most of those folks were doing, but through actual sound science. What do you see some other implications that using a continuous glucose monitor can be used or utilized in a person's health goals?
Yeah, so we get people coming from all sorts of, stages of their health journey, if you will. We get people that have had a diagnosis. Maybe it's a type 2, maybe it's a pre-diabetes diagnosis. So they are looking to perhaps, not go on medication or get off of medication. We get people that have other kinds of diagnoses, maybe like an autoimmune issue, and they're curious how their gut is responding, and using the glucose data as a way to see that. So that's really interesting. We get biohackers, right? People that are just super interested in, longevity and doing these different kinds of tests. And we get plant-based, we get vegans, we get carnivores, we get, all kinds of dietary approaches, and we get a lot of weight loss, right? I mean, that's like a lot of people, when it really kind of drills down to it, yes, we want to live well, we want to live healthy. And a lot of times it comes down to, making some changes, to their body weight. So it's really interesting for us to be able to work with all of these different people, meeting them, and helping them get to where their goals are, meeting them where they are, and then helping them get to where their goals are. And a lot of times with the weight loss, it can be hard because you might have great glucose control, but nothing's really changing, in that area. So that's when we start to talk about, and you mentioned this a little bit about coffee. That's when we start to talk about the other factors that can impact your glucose that can also help with your healthy lifestyle. Things like sleep, things like stress, and things like exercise. So we can see direct impacts of sleep, stress, and exercise in your glucose levels, which kind of blows people's minds sometimes. They're like, wait, why did it go up with coffee? And we say, well, coffee can be a stress response on some people. And that means your cortisol goes up and your body releases some glucose, and people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Or, I have people that like, oh, I had this weird spike in the afternoon. What happened? I said, tell me about your day. And they were like, well, I had this really stressful phone call. I say, well, there you go. You can see it right there. Which I think really brings into a more holistic use of this. I think people can really use this data to manage their lifestyle in the healthiest way possible, maybe to improve their sleep, to help manage their stress levels, to improve their exercise.
Yeah, I noticed what was interesting is if my sleep drops below the optimal level, then my blood sugar stability tends to fluctuate significantly more. And before, it was determined by, for example, I would just feel that I would want to eat more. The tendency is if I sleep less, I want to eat more. I want to eat more stimulants, and I want to drink more coffees, and I want more sugar. And of course, there's a coffee shop on every corner that's got desserts and pastries and lots of coffee. And it's like, okay, it's really easy to slide into that. What are some of the, maybe you kind of touched on it a little bit, some things that can throw your blood sugar off that aren't necessarily carbohydrate or sugar related that are kind of surprising that people might, you go, what, really?
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others is a total game changer. Suddenly you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Yeah. I think we always get the HIIT workouts, right? So those super high intense anaerobic workouts, people are like, what's going on? I was fasted. I didn't even eat anything before I worked out. Like, why did I have this huge spike? And that's really, the body just doesn't have enough energy, free floating energy to support your workout. And so it has to create its own again by, pulling it out of the liver, the muscles, whatever it is. So that's always a big surprise for people. And they're like, wait, what's going on? That's so weird. We get also the sleep, as you mentioned. So it's really interesting. Chronic poor sleep. And actually we see this a lot in shift workers. So if you work the night shift, in whatever field that you're in, or you just chronically stay up very late, don't get a lot of sleep, are off of that natural circadian rhythm, we tend to see a higher baseline glucose, and it's harder for you to process those carbohydrates the next day, regardless of whether you succumb to the cravings or not.
Right.
Your body just doesn't handle them as well as if you are sleeping. So, getting like a really great night's sleep. So there's a lot of interesting information that we talk about chrononutrition, like the timing of your meals.
Right. Now, would that be the general feeling? So for example, if I haven't slept well and then, or I've got a shortened sleep cycle, and I get up in the morning and I got to do my 6 a.m. training session, and 6 a.m. hits and I wake up and I have that, oh God, no, I don't feel like getting up. Where if I have a full sleep, is that correlated to the sleep, or is it also correlated to like maybe more of my blood sugar is at that given moment?
Well, there's the natural like dawn phenomenon, sort of the dawn effect of your body naturally releasing through the hormones, through your body's natural release of hormones. It will, glucose will tend to increase in those early morning hours, like 4 to 8 a.m.
Yep.
And so also sometimes people will say like, why is my glucose so high when I wake up? I mean, that's like, I haven't eaten in hours, right? So that's sort of your body's housekeeping, housekeeping abilities that you can't really control. But I also think people wake up in a stressed state. I think we are living in such a stressed time that when you wake up, your mind is racing. You've got so much going on. You are stressed. You have so much happening in your life. We see when people sit there and do a 10-minute meditation or deep breathing, their glucose levels drop down, and then they can start the day on a much more even keeled. It can be exacerbated if you wake up and then you do a HIIT workout and then you're like super, super high, but it does tend to go down afterwards.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's really interesting. The impact of meditation on stress response and blood sugar level. That's wild. So some of these things that have been kind of advocated and sort of, what do I call soft sounding, unscientific responses now can be measured using a continuous glucose monitor, which is really interesting. Let's talk about the data that you guys use as a company, particularly, and what you have access to and what you're able to do with that data. For example, if someone is using the technology that you guys provide, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So you got to see it firsthand in terms of your own, using the CGM and seeing all that kind of stuff. So we have a really incredible app. Obviously, not only do you just get the raw data, but we slice and dice it 7 ways to Sunday. We're giving you obviously your average, and you can take a daily average, weekly average, month, however long you want to look at your averages. You can compare, right, this month versus last month, maybe like when I was on vacation versus when I came back from vacation. We also do what we love. One of my favorite metrics is that glycemic variability. So that again is what makes the continuous glucose monitor so special, is that, again, like I said in the beginning, the finger stick is a moment in time, right? Your lab draw at your annual physical. It's a moment in time. Yeah.
It sucks. You can only prick yourself so many times that it starts getting really annoying.
You feel for the type 1 diabetics that have
done
this for decades, right? So what we think is so cool is that you can see the variability, the swings in your glucose that we find to be one of the best proxies really for that insulin resistance, right? So that we can see over time, do you have these huge tsunamis, or do you have sort of these gentle ocean waves? And it sounds like you were more of a gentle ocean wave kind of guy when you were wearing your CGM. And we can, every once in a while, you might have a big spike, something might happen, or you have a birthday dinner.
It's usually Saturday night when the UFC fights come on, and I've got a whole bunch of snacks and, the stress, like the adrenaline release of getting into the fight mode.
Yeah.
What's interesting, so I'll share an insight for people so they're listening, because some people like to know little stories that happen. So I like watching the UFC, and we get in here, have a few friends over, and we shout at the TV and scream for our favorite guys and boo, and it's a real fun event. But I notice as I get into the fights, my desire to consume food from the stress and adrenaline and perceived aspect has this, and my blood sugar starts going all crazy, and it's like, oh well, like I'm physiologically responding to a video image. There's no fight, there's no danger in my life, but my body's responding in a way that says there's danger, and then there's this desire to consume. And I've noticed this also at the movie theaters. So I have always advocated for people to go to the movie theaters, and you can do this with your continuous glucose monitors. It's a trip. And you know how you like the action builds up in the movie at the theater and people get stressful. Well, as soon as the relief comes, you see people eating their popcorn and eating their candy and drinking, and so you see this kind of wave of consumption. And so I always say, go to a movie that you don't want to watch and watch the people eat related to the movie. It's a trip. And then your CGM will actually mimic this. Yeah. You can see it, and your blood is responding to the stress and the response, and then the eating stuff. So that's really cool. Any other things that you guys do on the slice and dice that people might not think of when it comes to CGMs?
Well, I also think we have a meal tracking capability. You can log your meals, and I really think that's helpful for people to not only see a timestamp, like, if you want to play around with, okay, well, I ate my regular dinner at 8:00 because that's when I get home. Okay, well, I'm going to try and move that a little bit earlier. And that can be so helpful for people to see how just eating a little bit earlier can really help you. If you are someone that does fasting, a lot of people out there dabble in the intermittent fasting or one meal a day, shifting that window around. Let's see, how do I feel? How does my glucose change? Because, and I think you had asked this earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't answer it, but what you feel when you have those big swings is a crash, right? What goes up must come down.
Yes.
So it's that feeling of, it's that like fatigue, the hanger, the fogginess. When someone has a high carbohydrate breakfast, that they go to Starbucks and have a giant latte with all the whipped cream and things, and then they have, a donut or, a big loaf of something or other, their glucose spikes super high. And then about 10 a.m., they have a crash, right? And so we get a lot of people coming to us saying, I'm so tired all the time. Why am I so tired? So we can help them even out their glucose levels so that they aren't having these huge swings, these huge crashes, and then they end up eating more. They graze, they need a snack, they need more coffee, and they're not really listening to their body. Yeah.
It's funny because way back in the day, and this is really unhealthy habits, which would indicate, because it seems like if you eat sugar, you get this big correlation of insulin released, and then the crash is when you it sucks out all the sugar to your system, and then you go like way below, and then you want to eat again. And so one of the strategies that they used to do in the bodybuilding community is at nighttime, your evening meal, you'd eat like a dozen eggs and 2 or 3 Pop-Tarts to create this massive insulin spike. And then you'd wake up in the morning and you'd be just ravenous, and you would consume a lot of food, and you would have to, and bodybuilders would eat regularly, like 5-6 times a day, to get sufficient calories to support the growth. And then, which is super unhealthy, by the way. It's not, this is not a health pursuit. It's a pursuit to maximum muscle. And then later on, when I started learning these things, I started seeing, as you could eat, like your fiber content could change the blood sugar of a meal, or your protein. I found fiber and protein seem to be able to be the most tweakable aspects that would change the response of whatever the carbohydrate was that I ate. Some fats really throw me off. I don't metabolize fats particularly well. You want to talk about just a little bit about the impact of some fats, because there's a big community that's like fats, but that doesn't agree with anybody. Can you kind of indicate maybe some fats that might not be so good for people, or some implications on blood sugar?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're spot on, right? That when we talk about regulating your glucose, we have a lot of different, avenues to go down. But one of them is absolutely, what are the macros? What are you eating in your meal? And how can we balance out the portion sizes? Or, let's really lean heavily on our fiber, because no one's getting it. And like, no one's getting the amount of fiber that we're supposed to, or very few people are. Right?
I'm definitely the fiber king. I would take on anybody, but I'm a rarity. I'm a total rarity.
But so we can all improve. We can all try to attain your status.
Well, it's not a status. It's a liability. I don't know.
Your GI system thanks you, right?
Yes, it did. Yes, indeed. Well, because as a guy that lifts weights and works out, I have to consume a lot of plant matter in order to do that. So my fiber content is absolutely like off the charts.
Have you ever measured it? Like, do you have a ballpark of how much you think you take in?
I haven't checked it recently, but it's never less than 100 grams a day. Never. Except when I'm fasting. I fast 1 day a week. So for example, yesterday I stopped eating, 6 o'clock at night, and then I'll resume eating at around 8 or 9 o'clock tomorrow. So I do, it's like 36. It's 36. I try to shoot for 36. Sometimes it's 38. Sometimes it's 40. Sometimes it's 34.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range once a week. And then once a week I have a spike day where I take my calories and run the ladder. But that's once you get your body fat to a certain level.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the fiber is really incredible. When you look at all the effects that it has on your body, right? But yes, so for glucose, 1,000%, fiber is a wonderful way to regulate it. There's the soluble and the insoluble fiber. The soluble fiber is really going to have the biggest impact on your glucose levels. And that's terrific, right? Like, that's a great way to work on it. Protein also, especially we talk a lot about timing your macros, right? So we want to have these things. We want to have fiber. We want to have protein before we have the carbohydrate, sort of like primes the system, as opposed to hitting it with, some white rice right away, like a sushi or something. And then, you're up on Mount Everest up there. So those two things are great. And then healthy fats, right? So like you said, too much of it can be too much. And some people really have malabsorption and absorptive problems.
I'm one of those people. I don't absorb fats particularly well, which was all part of the arguments that Matt and I used to go through. Matt's a keto guy, loves fats, does well on fats. I'm like, dude, I can't eat that fat. I feel terrible, and so then later on, years later, this type of technology started to emerge. It's like, oh, okay, this is different.
Yeah. Yeah. So how much have you been able to sort of pinpoint how much or what type? Are you a saturated, unsaturated? Like an avocado is fine, but too much olive oil is really too much.
Here's an interesting aspect. I need a certain amount of saturated fat or it impacts my testosterone levels. And how I figured this out, and this is really odd. So I would have my spike days on some day, and after the spike day, where I would be eating way more saturated fat than unsaturated fat, because I'd eat maybe fried food. That might have I would just French fry, whatever. I'd have butter on the potatoes. I would have like all kinds of different things, and I would go to the gym after and I'd be like, I feel like the next 24 to 36 hours, I would feel at my peak. And when we did hormone testing. And if I tested my hormones within 24, 36 hours of spiking my saturated fats, my testosterone levels would be awesome. If I did it without the saturated, if I just stayed on an unsaturated fats, my testosterone levels would drop. And we're talking like a 50% swing.
Wow.
And then of course, insulin is another thing. Like, so if you're having a lot of blood sugar, we see that testosterone levels tends to drop as well. Like, so if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, we'd see testosterone levels go back down again. And so I don't know all of the interactions, but it was like really fascinating to see that food had super big impacts on my hormone levels.
Right. Right. And there's, particularly for women too, in terms of where they are in their cycle, that's really interesting. And we talk to a lot of women that might have PCOS, or, still might have a slightly regular schedule perimenopause. And it's fascinating for them, how do you eat, or even just to manage, PMS symptoms, right? I mean, how you're eating based on where your estrogen levels are versus your progesterone levels is really fascinating. And fasting also for women, right? I mean, estrogen loves fasting. Estrogen loves a ketobiotic diet. And that's in the first part of your cycle, but that second half of your cycle, you don't want to be fasting, right? You don't want to be stressing out like that. And, you want to be eating different kinds of foods and not fasting. And I just think it's fascinating what, our hormones are receptive to so much that what we're eating, and fats absolutely play a role in it.
You bring up a great point, and I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to touch on this because I have a lot of really, I would say, really smart, intelligent women who are talking about this specifically. A lot of the data and research and traditional studies and stuff wasn't designating particularly where a woman was in a cycle. Like a man kind of runs on a 24-hour cycle and a woman runs on a 28-day cycle or thereabouts. And you touched on that specifically because all of them that are doing, they all have their hormone tests with the ladies they're coaching. They all have them doing continuous glucose monitors. And when they were doing alternate day or intermittent fasting or, OMAD or whatever, a lot of them were finding, yes, they couldn't fast at certain times of the month. They could at the other time. The other thing is that a lot of women find that they do better if they eat early and fast later because of the way the hormone cycle is going. How do you see CGMs impacting women's health and women's unique? Because a lot of the information, data, research, it has been sort of skewed on the guy side of things and not taking in, it's just kind of an omission on that hormone cycle. How do you see that impacting, and what do you expect that CGMs can do that maybe you can't detect under regular circumstances on steady state?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it depends sort of which sort of where you are. I think women with PCOS, they are already maybe getting prescribed metformin, things like that, right? The CGM is a way for you to gather even more data about where your body is and how it's processing, where you are right now. And then you can make experiments and test and try things out with this tool that's showing you exactly how your body's responding to these different tests, right? And so you can really help avoid, staying on metformin, or, you can increase your chances of, fertility and all that kind of stuff. If you're in perimenopause or menopause and you're experiencing all of those terrible symptoms, maybe hot flashes, maybe brain fog, maybe low energy, you don't know what you're doing. Like, you don't have an idea of what your body is doing. And that's why maybe you shouldn't be fasting. Maybe that's throwing your whole body off, right? And so you should be fasting, only during these first 2 weeks. And then, don't fast during your ovulatory phase, and that's why you can wear CGM. You can wear CGM for 3 months, right? What better way to get a handle on your natural rhythm and your natural cycle than having this amazing amount of data for you? And then you can make these tests, right? You can say, oh, gosh, I'm really not responding to things after like 6 p.m. I need to shift my whole eating window, a little bit earlier in the day. And here I was, no one ever told me that. I had no idea, right? Or, I've been eating sort of these foods, but I didn't realize I should have been adding more probiotics or something like that to really help my gut. So I think it's really applicable no matter where you are. Particularly, I think women need to see more than 1 month, just so that you can really kind of see your cycle on a more continuous basis.
Yeah, I've noticed there's different levels to the PMS, and there's like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and I've seen it's not the same every month either.
No.
There's variances on that.
Yeah.
So for all our lady friends, definitely look at this, and all for our guys, why not do this with your wife or significant other and start seeing the differences between if you're doing shared meals or shared diets, oftentimes, or timing of things. That might not be what's best for both of you. And these nuances are important and can lead to long-term complications or long-term optimizations, as I like to say. So we always want the more positive outcomes. Where can people get one of these CGMs, where they can find out more about you, learn about this, all this sort of stuff? I think this is one of the great breakthroughs that's happened in the world of biohacking and health. I think the preventative capabilities of this technology are extraordinary. The nuances on individuality, which we have a book coming out in September about that, talking about how do you discover the independent aspects of dietary regulation for yourself, and CGMs is one of the areas that we advocate for. So where can people find out more about you, your company, and everything that CGMs can do?
Nice. Well, we welcome everyone. Again, I think, everyone can benefit from this kind of data, no matter where you are in your life and your health journey. And you can find us at www.nutrisense.io. And we're also on Facebook. We're on Instagram at NutrisenseIO, Twitter, TikTok, the YouTube, we're everywhere. And just come check us out. We actually have an amazing blog, really great articles that if you're just trying to understand maybe how this can relate to your sleep issues or your performance training, we have so many great articles open to everyone. So definitely check us out. And I hope you guys learned something.
Catherine, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know I learned so much. I hope our listeners learned so much, but more importantly, I hope our listeners take advantage of some of those offers and start learning this. This is one of those technologies that you go, OMG, how did I not know about this before? And your ability to get direct and nuanced information about you personally is unparalleled. I wish you nothing but the best of success. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for all our listeners, take action today. Get at it. Get your NutriSense CGM and enjoy the discovery process of how your food affects you. I'm Wade T. Lightheart. This is Bioptimizers, and this is the Awesome Health Show. You want to share it, like it, all that sort of stuff. Please do so and let people know how we're doing. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Wade.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar devouring and protein digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.